Hi there, this is Sarab Chula. Today we are going to discuss some basic principles and the fundamentals of Buddhism while having a little understanding on basic principles, gradually improving it to further understanding with little touch of medical science. Some of the teaching which we are discussing are very basic at the beginning. Therefore, we would like to pay attention a little bit further once I gradually increase my teaching to a little bit higher level. First, we must understand the most unique 12-fold dependent origination or the Paticca Samuppada, which is found in Buddha's teaching, which is very unique into Buddha's religion. Going further, we must understand all religions in the world have a common denominator, which is an existence of a self or a sentient being or a soul, and which is present, become the absolute must in all religion except Buddhism. But Buddha claimed that without a being or a soul, but the activity of the brain can create consciousness from local interaction of brain modules, which I am going to explain further. So there are 12-fold dependent core modules that Buddha discussed, which is how we become conscious. And that is his first denominator that we can find, which is instead of a self or a sentient being, Buddha's religion is cause and effect religion, which he defined as the 12-fold dependent origination, also known as in Pali, Paticca Samuppada. They are 12 building blocks, modules, which are creating the consciousness. These cause and effect modules in the brain, which I believe what he's talking about, and these brain neuronal network of the mind building modules are mutually and locally interacting to give rise to mind and a self agent, which he defined as Atta, also known as Sakkaya Ditthi belief, but only it is just a belief, but there is no soul or sentient being present. Secondly, most unique second denominator of Buddhism is that with the presence of mm, denial of God. All religions has a single God or multiple gods, but most ancient Buddhism denies its existence. And Buddha says, Atta hi atta no nato, ko hi nato parosya. In other words, Buddha asked his disciples that if there is no self, then what is the use of having God to protect you? Because you don't have your own self to protect you. The most unique third denominator of Buddhism is which is uniquely found in Buddhism and never found in any other religion. Therefore, Buddha defined that characteristic as trilakshana, three salient characteristics uniquely found in Buddha's teaching. According to Buddhist teaching, the three universal characteristics are the impermanence, which he defined as anicca. Everything is changing, and everything is unstable. Everything is continue to change, and which he defined as impermanence. Then, second characteristic feature that he defined is suffering or unsatisfactoriness, which he defined as dukkha, and the non-self or anatta, which I already talked about, which he denies having a self, and which are both interlinked and interdependent as he's defining it in the 12-fold interdependent co-arising of the Paticca So in summarization, the three salient characteristics that Buddha is talking about There is anicca, there is impermanence or continued flux of change, is a salient character that Buddha's teaching defines. Second is the suffering of mental. He characterized it, the suffering into mental suffering as well as the physical suffering. Mental suffering he defined as a domanassa, upayasa. Upaya is a giving up component of it, where most suffering ultimately lead to giving up. In other words, people try to commit suicide. So it is somewhat similar to an extreme mental exhaustion due to the mental suffering or domanassa, a person give up. Similarly, we will discuss about the physical suffering, which is defined as dukkha, which is ultimately propagating to crying and lamentation. These are taken from the last four links of the Buddha's teaching of 12-fold Paticca which I am going to expound further. The third one is not having a salient being or non-self nature or not having a Atman or soul, which is a salient characteristic of Buddhism. Next is there are three types of attachment Buddha are talking about. One is lobha, meaning greed, which is also can be characterized as the desires, wanting, liking, craving, and many desires of that type. Then Buddha talk about the second one, which is opposite of the liking, which he defined as dvesha, which is the anger, hatred, aversion, not wanting, disliking, avoiding. Third one, he says the attachment is ignorance. You may get attached to something, but you are not aware to it. And that is defined as moha, also known as ignorance or avidya. Subliminally, you are attracted to, but you do not know consciously, therefore, it is subliminal ignorance. That's what the moha means. He also talked about three types of world that the human existing is consisting of. Therefore, he called these worlds triloka. In other words, the three types of worldly experience that every human being going through, and these three types Buddha has conquered. That's why he has a name called Triloka Natha. He has conquered all three worlds. Therefore, he is also known as Triloka Natha. So the three worlds are the Kammavatta Loka, the deep sleep state of the human mind, where all brain modules are inactive, no emergence of mind or self agent is present, then you are mostly unconscious. So every human beings go through this world, and that is why he want to emphasize that. So the Kammavatta for us, we can understand it can be scientifically explained as stage 4 sleep. We are in extreme deep sleep stage. Second, Buddha call as the Klesha Vataloka. Klesha means you are awake or wakeful state, fully awake and alert state. And the human conscious agent is experiencing the sensuous world. In other words, you feel more than real person is experiencing the world because of this conscious agent. And that world is that we go through from the wakefulness all the way to the time of sleep. Then he talk about the third world, which is he defined as Vipaka Vata Loka. Loka means the world. So that is actually the world that is defining as the dream world of conscious agent who is in the REM stage of sleep. In other words, he's dreaming stage. So in that world, the experiencer is a momentary consciousness who's living at the anterior cingulate area, where Buddha's definition, which we match to the anterior cingulate, that's where we will explain where the mind is originating. A spontaneous arising of a self-agent is present, but there is no long awakened person that you see who continuously living the experience like in the Klesha water. In other words, recording to the hippocampus memory is absent during this Vipaka water stage because the long-standing person is connected with the hippocampus. He must be writing this experience continuously during wakefulness state. And that is why during dream we cannot remember anything. But there is definitely a spontaneously arising person, like Buddha said, conscious agent is present at that moment who is really truly experience the dream as if it is true. He has the same experience of fear, anger, or during that experience time, there is a person like agent is present, but he is not a permanent soul. And this one is arising continuously and dying during this vipakavata. What I believe, what he's trying to emphasize is there are two types of conscious agent presenting in here. Vipakavata conscious agent is momentarily experiencing the experience, but there is no continuous writing of that experience, and it is not given to the long-standing, continuously living person, which is in the hippocampal memory writing area, also the explicit memory generating region conscious agent, which I will come back again. Then Buddha says in his Heart Sutra there are five types of these aggregates or for the dependent co-arising, the main component of five components which give rise to the human self agent. And these aggregate Buddha described in the Heart Sutra as five skandhas which make the nama component of our existence. His definition I have taken from many people, including a real Pali term originally from Sri Lankan Pali terms, what he defined as skandhas, or the five things which giving rise to human mind and the self-agent, which are the rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, and vijnana. Roshan Yoshida, who described this rupa as the form or images, and the Vedana as the feeling, Sanya as ideas, Skandha as formation and consciousness. Thich Nhat Hanh is describing the same rupa as forms, and the Edward Conze also described as form, and our well-known Valpola Rahula, the most venerable Bhante Rahula, describe it as matter. The Vedana, everyone is accepting as feeling sensation module, except for Valpola Rahula who consider it as sensation. Sanya is the idea of perception, which I believe is the correct term because most people are agreeable onto the perception. In other words, we perceive the world from visual cortex, hearing cortex, and taste as well as smell, and also contact with the body. With the define these things, visual cortex separated from visual perception to hearing perception, as well as smell perception, taste perception, and the body perception known as kottabha. The perception of these sensation is defined as the sanya. In other words, it is kind of a memory module, which is the mental imagery module that whenever we perceive something, we can immediately remember and perceive that image. So the fourth one is the sankara, the formation, which is mental formation or impulses, mental formation, which is actually the cognitive module, the thinking component, thinking, deciding, planning, all that coming into cognitive module. That is the sankara module of the Buddha's, the fourth module. When the last one he discussed as the vijnana means the consciousness, the final experience of it, conscious experience that you find all of them agreeing to that definition. Why I bring this many definitions because many people have given multiple definitions. In summary, the five things, five skandhas, five type of aggregates which create human being-like existence, the self-agent, is made out of nama component according to Buddha definition, and that is consisting of a worldly image, rupa, which is what we see when we awake and open our eyes. And that rupa, he has five types, which he's talking about: hearing, rupa, as well as a vision, visually that we imagine the world, we can see the image. And the Vedana is every time when you experience any kind of worldly experience, it trigger immediate feeling component to it. Then come the sanya or the perceptual component, Perception is the result of the visual cortex creation. When it become projected, we will discuss that a little further. And also sankhara is the thinking component or cognitive component, and the vijnana component, which is the final product of our consciousness, which is the consciousness, Buddha says, and that belongs to the last part, the fifth one. In Buddha's definition, when these five come together and interact mutually as modules, it generates a mind as well as a conscious agent or a atta, Buddha describe it as. It is emergent phenomena, which is Buddha call it as the Sakkaya Ditthi phenomena, or existence of a person like emergence of a person like being emerged, but it is not true. It is just a belief only, or it's a feeling only, feeling of knowing only. Now I'm going to give you the meaning of the rupa. The rupa definition. What does rupa mean? Rupa in Sanskrit word means the form or the images, which refer to the appearance of physical object, which is common to yogic tradition, Hindu tradition, as well as Buddhist philosophy. They are just images, visual images, sound images, taste images, smell images, and anything that you can recall when it touch, feel. Your touch component is coming from the body. It is said that the rupa is not just the physical existence of an object like your body, objects in the world, but also tangible nature, which is arising in the mind as image of your body, or the object of the world, which is in the brain, which is just a tangible visual object, hearing object. When you get enlightened, you realize that external objects in the world and the external body of yours and others are also not real, but created inside the brain visual cortex. But they are rising and ceasing simultaneously, but our sensors cannot perceive it, just the way the light bulb is turned on 30 times and turned off 30 times. Therefore, these objects which is appearing in the visual cortex, hearing cortex, taste cortex, smell cortex, they are also arising and ceasing because there is a refractory period. Everything is there is a the objects are rising and ceasing because neuron is not continuously firing due to the refractory period. Therefore, just the entire world also arising in the visually cortex created 3D image that we create from the five senses, which arises and ceases simultaneously. Therefore, Buddha call it lujjati palujjati loko. Loka means the world which is arising is breaking world, splitting world, cracking world, bursting world. So the lujjati means the breaking, palujjati means splitting and cracking world. In other words, what we create is actually an emptiness, Buddha says. Therefore, he says sunnati loko, emptiness of the world and its object. Then he says Maya Loko, the mirage appearance of the world, because he says it's not absolute reality. We don't see absolute reality. It's like a mirage what you see when you see in the desert some mirage water is appearing where the animals run to it, but it's only a mirage. And that's what we are experiencing in that. And that is the meaning of the rupa in Buddha's definition. Next, now I'm going to the 12-fold wheel of life, what Buddha is talking about, which is also known as Bhava Chakra, which is the dependent arising causal factors that Buddha described instead of describing a human being derived consciousness that is known as Paticca Samuppada. Buddha is telling that the ultimate truth realization was explained to his disciples when he got this real understanding of this Paticca Samuppada. He began teaching this for the first time to his best friends, the five disciples who helped him during his major effort to reach enlightenment. And this sutra is known as Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. Buddha began to explain what his realization was. Buddha's ultimate truth realization was explained to them. And that is known as the first discourse, which explains how the wheel of life can emerge without a human being or Atman or a soul or human self. He defined that discovery as the dependent co-origination of the wheel of life, which feel like a human being, but even though it is appears as more than real person, there is no such soul or being, but something is continuing from life to life, but we must find out what it is. This is where the problem is, and one must inquire in within to find what is this continuation. We will ultimately help you understand it is just a continuation of holographic memory only. There is no person is continuing. But before that, most important component is what Buddha's teaching is the called Hetu Pala Vada, theory of cause and effect. How the life can be created from cause and effect in continuous interaction with bidirectional feedback loops with these five modules, which I explained earlier, of the object, the object perceptual world, as well as feeling and the memory component, including cognitive components, that all go like a creating a wheel of samsaric life. It could create a spinning effect to the life, and that spinning effect is the one is called Bhava Chakra. So his definition of wheel of life or wheel of existence, he started the wheel of existence from avidya or the ignorance. Brain activity is taking place, which we call that sankharas. Activities of the brain, which mostly sankharas are of cognitive components inside the brain, which I'm coming to explain later. And this is the preparation aspect of the brain when we emerge from deep sleep, coming into existence early in the morning when we awake. And in his description, there is a creation of Patisandhi Vijnana or rebirth consciousness taking place if somebody is passing from this world to the next world. And also, we are awakening right now. It is also present the similar way. Samkhara is the way it creates the first consciousness in the brain from the brain activity. That consciousness is the one called vijnana. Vijnana can be leaving life from one place to another life, or patisandhi vijnana can be from deep sleep to be awakened, especially from REM sleep to the awakened stage. Then he says there arises the nama and the rupa state. There is a nama component to it, that the five component I described, and there is the image of you. So there is mind and matter arises here. And when you are awakened, you are awakening your salayatana, means the five, six sense organs in the body. The eye consciousness, ear must be open up, eyes must be open up, and the taste buds must be tasted, and the smell must be. In other words, you're coming into opening your eyes, awakening into the world. Similarly, it can be when you're coming out of the mother's womb, you're opening your eyes for the first time. That's again the opening of Salayatana. Moment that you open the eyes, Salayatana and the smell and taste and all that, then they are taking place a contact with the world that he defined as Passa. In other words, object images, world images create contact. When it contact only, it creates the feeling. I will come back to explain why this contact, the friction component, is giving the feeling, which then create the craving or wanting or desires. There are three types of desires I described about. There is a wanting desire, liking desire, or the opposite of that is the hatred, dislike, aversion. And this is the one Buddha says create the upadana or strong attachment to the world. In other words, five component of that five um, Salayatana derived five component of images, the feeling component as well as the memory sanya component as well as the cognitive component of thinking, planning, deciding, as well as the ultimate physical action, the component of physical action with the experience is the one Buddha says is the when you hold it together, when the five things interact as one, holding it tightly to taken it as mine, there arises the birth, or the bhavanga or bhava. means 30, 31 planes of existence come to be, arising or becoming, you became one of the 31 planes of existence. Say, for an example, if you have a godly quality of wanting to help a human being and you are a higher worldly existence, or Brahmaloka is the highest level of existence, but you can also be animal existence if you're shouting, fighting, living like animal stage, and that plane existence also happening in the same time in the human existence. It's not outside world; it is also happening in the brain. Then the birth taking place, the moment birthing takes place because you held onto these all these five components. That is why you got the jati, then the birth appearance. The moment that you have jati, then the jara, marana, that means decay and ultimate death taking place. It is to the single experience, though it's the one experience to the next experience again take the cycle. Therefore, for a given second, maybe 60, 70 times of this conscious agent is born and he has died. And that definition of birth and death is called Shanika Marana. And that is happening within us. And the samsaric journey is continuous cycle is taking place because there is no loss of any kind of a feeding back of images to the visual sensations while we are awake. And also, if it is not, even if you close your eyes, there are feeding back from our inner mind of images coming in. Therefore, cycle continued. And to fight back that cycle, Buddha gave us a new way of eightfold path, which I am going to come back to explain how you can break this cycle. So the most important component I'm coming into, and to discuss this, I'm quoting from mm, very learned priest who has analyzed this uh, chakra in very carefully, and Madhavela Punnaji, priest who no longer with us, but this is his drawing, which is very precisely done. Who was a doctor before when he became a priest, therefore he had a very good psychological background of understanding of this. Therefore, he started the same 12-fold path with Avijja. But, but if you, I want you to pay attention of this cyclical phenomena is exactly same thing of 12-fold pathway. But he has divided them into cognitive process, emotional affective process, and the suffering or the dukkha process. This is the mental action or mental component of physical or mental action component which create the dukkha. Therefore, the emotional component is in the red color. That's why it is affective process. Then there is a cognitive process that he put down here in the blue. I'm now going to compare this with the human brain because I have matched all these what he had found with the human brain findings. The first thing I want you to know from the ignorance, avijja, but not being knowing because you're waking up every fraction of a second, mental activity taking place. Mental activity is the mental formation that he's talking about. That is what the sankhara is. Mostly of a mental construction now of many components, but sankhara major component is the thought process. Now it creates the vijnana or the perception of first vijnana taking place as a conscious agent. And that vijnana is the one create the nama rupa component, which is the five mental aggregates which I talk about, including a form. Form is the visual form, the visual world, or it can be the hearing form, it can be the taste form, smell form, all that. So the nama rupa pachaya salayatana, then the inner body and the inner senses repeatedly appearing is the way that he's defining. In other words, Buddha find that the salayatana, which is not the external salayatana, he's talking about internal body. There is a visual cortex, there is a hearing cortex, there is a smelling cortex, there is a tasting cortex. They also go through a refractory period. In that refractory period, there is momentary loss of our body. S1, S2 cortex of our body, which represent our external world, in the brain that also has a refractory period. And with his vision, new vision, he can see that it also stops and open again. That is why he says with the nama rupa arising, there is a arising of salayatana again. is continuous arising and ceasing. That's what we have to know there. Then Salayatana Pachya Passo, the contact with the sensors, sensory trigger taking place. The moment that you see visual object, that creates the emotional reaction. And the emotional reaction is the component that this priest has learned about is that every time when you see an object, it has the ability to trigger wanting desires. What it's trying to say is we have brain activation chemicals which are triggering for activation for liking, wanting, like dopamine, opioids, and those desiring ones are the neurotransmitter nuclei which are in the brainstem. We immediately get triggered with the experience of the object. Every object that we see in the world, is it a novel object or any object that we have seen, and that triggering is trigger emotional reaction. The reaction is triggering upward from the brainstem neurotransmitter nuclei, which are the serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, um, and acetylcholine and opioid receptors or neurons, which being triggered. Moment it triggered, though, it trigger also to the body. This upward triggering is the neurotransmitter nuclei, which are triggering to the brain itself upwardly. These are long tube-like wirings that serotonin neurons are connecting all the way to the neocortex. Similarly, there is a triggering to the body. Simultaneously, those triggering taking place from the HPA axis activation, hypothalamo pituitary adrenaline gland activation, and autonomic system activation. In other words, we trigger a 4F response depending on the object that we see. If there is a danger to the human, like us looking at a tiger who's leaping to devour your body, we have to run. And that triggering is taking place to the body because body muscles must be ready to run, increase the heart rate. All that is done through two systems. What is the sympathetic parasympathetic system, which is we call it autonomic system activation, as well as the HPA activation, where the cortisol get released from the adrenal gland, norepinephrine and epinephrine getting released, and that 4F response taken with the body directive ones as well as the brain triggering of these neurotransmitter nuclei triggering of all four hormones create this friction that he's talking about, and that is why he's talking about the passa. Passa mean a motor response. A motor means like chemical response, neuronal response, all that he considered like a neuron because it is a friction. One rotation of cyclical phenomena taking place opposite to the brain area, other one spinning backward to the body. In other words, he's trying to emphasize the motor component of this action before the feeling comes to be. That is why passa is like he says, when it is contact, immediate contact, the object contact with the sensory organ, it trigger a response. And triggering is like a motor response. That's why it is passa. He put a word to explain to people 2,500 years ago. We did not have any understanding how the brain works. And it is an emotional reaction, quite correctly. And that emotional trigger then creates the Vedana. Vedana can be one positive, something attractive, something food that you're hungry to eat, or you're meeting your mate, or run away response from avoiding, disliking, hatred, or running away with triggering of for a response. And that trigger, he says, is triggering the wanting, the desire, wanting. Three type of attachment. Hatred also, he says, attachment. It's similarly what you like, you want to get from the world, wanting desires, also attachment. What he says is this attachment is the one create that five interacting modules, five component of the mind creating modules to create a person to be emerged. When these five things emerge, when they interact together, emerge as one, he says they are emerge a existence. person or type of existence. In other words, a conscious agent emerge, a subjective self. He called it atta emerge, and you see objective world. You see the space and time emerge. Being self in the world emerge from this, and that is what the bhava means. And the existence of bhava are depending on this tanha, depending on quality of that desire. Desire is very strong, powerful desire. It is lower quality life formation happens. But if you have given up on desire, then high quality godly realm or Brahma realm birth is taking place. And that existence is determined by the upadana component, personalization. How strongly you are personalizing it. It is mine. This feeling is mine. Uh, this world is mine. Dichotomy of the world and the subjective objective split is taking place because you held into it, and that one is the one creating the self person. Can be person of a godly quality or animal quality, and that determines is by the bhava or the existence come to be. And the moment that happened, then the birth of an agent has self taken place, and that agent has a jati, there is a birth. So Buddha says, Skandhanam patu bhavo, ayatananam patilabho, ayang uchaditati. What are the skandhas? Five elements, five mentary aggregates. Nama, skandhanam patu bhavo, ayatana, ada salayatana, this rupa. Skandhanam patu bhavo, ayatananam patilabho means salayatana is now open again. There arises a new birth. This is not birth from the mother's womb. This is not somebody who is reborn from mothers and dying when the right time comes to be. Buddha says there is another person emergence here is only connected with the skandhas, five aggregates, and the form. This is salayatana form, the inner body and the inner senses. When these two come together, Buddha says there is the jati. So I may repeat again, jati, what is the definition of jati according to Buddha? The birth of a human agent, conscious agent, ayatananam skandhanam patilabho. Skandhas are the five mental aggregates. And ayatananam patilabho, this is arising continuously and ceasing continuously because refractory period, all sensory organs which are created in the brain, the visual cortex must stop for a second, then come back, then again re-arises. The images come to be. Every experience we create, there is a death and birth of salayatana also. And that birth is aging and death take place to that person, and that is what the jara and marana is. So this conclusion, I want to pay attention here. Emotional component he has divided, so cognitive component he has the cognitive affective, and that lead to the dukkha means the motor component. Now I am attaching that to human brain. Human brain understanding of new understanding came with the Nobel Prize winner Mr. Dillon and Tal group, his group, who discovered the basal ganglia loops of the brain, which are connecting with the prefrontal cortex. These are the reward network that I talk about, and also direct pathways and indirect pathways. To be precise, well, what he discovered is originally that we were taught as a just a motor component of Parkinson's disease, basal ganglia, was not the only thing which is going on in this basal ganglia. He discovered many other loops in addition to the motor loops. Therefore, the motor loop, where the basal ganglia is connecting with the motor component, which is going through the putamen. This is the caudate nucleus of the basal ganglia. This is the putamen. This is the globus pallidus component of the globus pallidus internus, globus pallidus, globus pallidus externus, globus pallidus externus, and the medial part of the thalamus. This connect the basal ganglia loop with the direct pathway, indirect pathway, and the hyperdirect pathway, the newest discovery that we as medical students never knew, were connecting here with the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex also this similar emotional component. There is a cognitive component and there is a motor component where we trigger all the motor actions. So, in other words, this emotional components of the basal ganglia, without going into very detail of the indirect direct pathway, are connecting with the hippocampus and the amygdala, and this is here the substantia nigra and the ventral tegmental area. And this pathway, direct, indirect, and hyperdirect pathway, is having the brain component what Buddha is talking about, which include the images coming into the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex receive the entire mantle of the cerebral cortex. All five sensory images of the visual cortex, hearing cortex, as well as taste cortex, and the smell cortex, all of them project to the prefrontal cortex. Therefore, the object of the world is received by this whole entire organism. This organization, what Buddha is defined as the five components which create the mind, is our new discovery that we are writing a book on. But we are presenting to you to understand that there is similarities of what Buddha's five components which create a human mind and a self is existing in the prefrontal cortex. And that is the prefrontal cortex and the basal ganglia. And having said that, when you compare this the discovery of this priest who discovered about that, here is the cognitive component of it. This is the emotional component of the basal ganglia, and which is also projecting here. And emotional ones are connecting with the amygdala, connecting with the hippocampus. These are all the basal ganglia connecting with the emotional component loop, which is shown here in red, are connecting with the prefrontal cortex, orbitofrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate, connecting with the globus pallidus and externus and internus. Without going into detail, this is the emotional component. This is the cognitive component. There are two types of pre and post. Frontal eye field is the component that there is a visual field being held by the frontal eye field, and that is the one holding the objects of the world, frontal eye field, and that is that loop in the green color. And the motor component, this is where we develop Parkinson disease and others, motor component. So we first hold the images of the world through the frontal eye field loop. This is the frontal eye field loop connecting with the putamen and the globus pallidus. Then the others are cognitive component, emotion. This is the emotional component, cognitive component, visual object holding component, and the motor component. Now I explain how the mind is created. Buddha had a very deep understanding of how the brain is creating a mind and a self-agent. Therefore, Buddha is a very intelligent human being who is telling another way rather than having a godly here soul which is coming and going without giving a proper answer. As a scientist, he is giving us a more deep understanding. This is again the deeper description of same that you can read at leisurely when I mail this, but you will see exactly how the avidya is creating this sankara, vijnana, nama, rupa, salayatana component of it, and the 12-fold pathway that you will see here, how the pasa component creating the tanha leading to upadana, upadana to the bhava, 31 plane of existence comes to be, which I already discussed, and that is the sansara gamana, the continuous life cycle that Buddha is talking about. So therefore, this description Buddha in the sutra, he described this five mind aggregate as the prapancha, and I describe it in detail, but I don't have time to explain all that. But this is how our life is being formed. And that images, Madhavala Pannaji's interpretation is right here. He says, in speaking of sense of sight, Buddha spoke of images, the rupa, perceiving first. This is taken directly from his book, the late Venerable Dr. Madhavala Punnaji Mahatera, Original Teaching of Buddha, page 22. So as I described the sensation, the sanya, the conduct, sankara, construction of the mental, this is the most of thinking, thought, process and others. Completion of five stages, the process as a perception, ultimately creating the vijnana he's talking about. And the solution, the salvation that I want to touch about, how you can come out of this. There is a final path to salvation from this eightfold path Buddha has told about last, the four marga satya. He said four components of dukkha satya, samudaya satya, dukkha nirodha satya, and the magga satya. Magga is the path to getting enlightened. Is right here, the noble eightfold path. And you must develop samadhi, purification of the view. There is no self or atman because it become a barrier. Because Buddha will explain that there is no self in this. If you imagine there is a self, you cannot follow this path. And samma sankappa is a cognitive thinking without having a self doing it. It's all happen automatically. There is no real doer according to Buddha. So there is no real thinker. Thinking's happening in the brain. There is no real doer according to Buddha. There is no one really speaks. Samma vacha is automatically is happening. When you purify the mind, it's automatically happening. And that's what he's talking about in Karaniya Metta Sutra. Livelihood, right livelihood, somehow ajiva, how we should live in the world. He gave a very good bit, wonderful definition in the Karaniya Sutra that you must follow me as a teacher, as the one, the role model. Therefore, you can have a right Samma Ajiva. So, Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, Samma Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, Samma Vaya, Samma Vach, Samma Vachi, Samma uh, Samma Sammatta. Sammanta means the action. Livelihood is Samma Ajiva, and the right effort. There are four type of efforts how to get rid of this, and the right concentration, then ultimate the right mindfulness. And that conclude my talk, but I haven't explained very detail of how this can be done. But I thought that I have given enough understanding for you all to have a very basic but profound understanding when you compare that to human brain, how all this generating the attachment component and all that, how we can get rid of that, and then we can have a new type of consciousness emerge in the human brain, which I will defer to another day. I thank you very much for listening to me, and I admire your continuation to the end of the talk, listening to me. And thank you so much. And I remain.